I have a couple of quotes for you. I must be the dumbest kid in the class. I have been here for the longest time in the same class, and yet I am still the biggest thief. I steal from everybody, even now. Another quote is, every day is a holiday. That is the attitude and the spirit and the sense of humor of a Detroit native. Yeah, why is that? Well, we'll talk about that. We're talking about a specific Detroit native this time. Born in 1928 in Detroit, Mr. Barry Harris was raised in the family of Melvin and Bessie Harris. Now his mom played piano in church, so he came up with music. And of course, at a very young age, somewhere around 4 years of age, she brought him over to the piano. Now he wasn't a baby, he wasn't the oldest one, he was number 4 or 5. But at 4, she brought him over to the piano. And his journey began. Now at first he's playing classical literature and some church music and this and that, but he is in Detroit. And Detroit got a whole swing thing going, baby, in the blues, because you gotta understand something about Detroit. After the war and during Jim Crow, Detroit was one of the most segregated and racist cities in the United States. And I'm not talking about just up north. They rival Birmingham, Alabama, and Tupelo, Mississippi. Detroit was rough for black folks. So the other thing that he learned to play was the blues. You had to be able to play the blues. And of course, there's a great kinship between gospel and blues. Now, as he matured and developed, his mother paid attention. And at a point in his early teens, she simply went and asked him, look, do you want to follow my path into the church and play church music? Or are you trying to play this new jazz music that I hear you listening to all the time? Well, he didn't hesitate. Mom was open about it, and he told her the truth. I want to play jazz. He had been listening for a while. But you see, he came across a very important album called Web City. Yeah, Sonny Stitt's on that thing, and Fats Navarro is on that thing, and the great Bud Powell is on that thing. And that was it. That was his turning point. He's like 17 years old, and this thing hits him like a storm. And he went and did just automatically what I have to push and beg and plead and threaten my students to do. Go transcribe. Go listen to a great jazz solo and learn it note for note. He did that. He went to that album and he learned every one of Bud Powell's solos note for note. And during his lifetime, he said on numerous occasions that he considered Bud Powell to be the epitome of jazz. His spirit, his creativity, his improvisations, his confidence, harmonic sense, everything is the epitome of jazz. Now, he learned and achieved his PhD, not in a university, but in the nightclub. He tells a story of standing outside a place we're going to talk about pretty soon. The Bluebird Inn. He was too young to go in there. He would just stand outside and watch musicians go and come and listen and learn. And pretty soon he's playing dances in high school. Yeah. And then later he's getting a chance to play with some of the up and coming musicians on the local Detroit scene. And there are many. You got to understand, Detroit had Kenny Burrell, Detroit had Milt Jackson, Detroit had so many cats coming and going, the great Tommy Flanagan on piano, and later Paul Chambers and others. So there was plenty of bad cats to play with and learn from. And that is what he did. And he kept playing gigs here and there with this one and that one. Catch a gig here, catch a gig here, go to a jam session here, go to a jam session there. Until finally, he ended up following Tommy Flanagan, the great pianist. Tommy moved to New York. And when he moved to New York, that left an opening in the house band at the Bluebird Inn, which was the hottest black jazz club in Detroit. And in walks my man, Barry Harris. And he is now playing piano in the hottest band in the hottest club in town, or at least on the black side of the town, okay? Now, everybody came through there. Not just the locals like Betty Carter and, Tommy when he was back in town, and Sonny Stitt and people like that, but traveling musicians like when Miles lived in Detroit for like 5 months. He was a regular at this club, and Barry played with him all the time. Yusuf Lateef grew up in Detroit. He played with him all the time. Eventually, Cannonball Adderley comes to town, and Cannonball takes note of this young pianist. He files it away for future, because he's working with Miles at that time, but he got his eye on doing his own thing, and he pencils Mr. Harris in. And sure enough, somewhere around 1960, when Cannonball breaks out with his quintet, with his little brother Nat on trumpet, and Sam Jones, another Floridian from Jacksonville, on bass, you had this kind of Florida funk thing going on, the kind of blues thing. Well, you had blues in Detroit too, so Cannonball brought Barry Harris in on piano. And you can find videos and audio recordings of this. Barry is playing his butt off, and Cannonball and Nat, they're at their peak too. This is 1960, 61, and it is going nuts, man. And you know what? At that point, Barry's like, I got myself a regular gig. The scene is in New York. Time to go. And go he did to New York. And soon he's playing with Gene Ammons, Sonny Stitt, sitting in with Bird. At least while Bird was alive, he was sitting in with him, in the Detroit days and whatnot. And all the cast that followed, he's on the scene. And even after he left Cannonball's thing, he still played with the best of the best. While he was still at the Bluebird playing locally, he touched a few people. You see, he was not just a musician, a player. He became what we call a jazz griot, a teacher of the highest level. Oh yeah, now we're getting to it. You see, people he touched are like Donald Byrd, Charles McPherson, Kenny Burrell, the great Joe Henderson, Curtis Fuller, Paul Chambers. Some of the most accomplished legendary musicians in the history of jazz that came out of Detroit came through Barry Harris' home, because that was his classroom. You came by his crib, his home, for the squares out there. You came by his crib and you hung out and you jammed and you talked and you found out what he was doing. He touched everybody. Matter of fact, as an acoustic bass player who was playing jazz, but later he switched to electric bass and became the most important bass player in the development of Motown records. We're talking about soul music now. Got Mr. James Jamerson. James Jamerson, legendary Motown bass player, used to study with Barry Harris. And whenever John Coltrane would be anywhere near Barry Harris, he'd always stop by to see what Barry was working on, because Barry, just like Train, they were both explorers. They were digging deep into the music, coming up with new techniques, new structures, new ideas, new way to turn a phrase, new way to harmonize, new ways to substitute, new ways to just swing, baby. Oh yeah, yes, yes. He formed an association with Thelonious Monk as well, and with the Baroness. When Clifford Brown was killed, and the pianist, Richie Powell, who was Bud Powell's brother, was also killed, when Max Roach tried to reconstitute the band, who would he choose to play piano? Well, it was Bud Powell's brother who was killed that had that. Well, you go to a man who already said Bud Powell was the epitome of jazz. You go to Barry Harris. So Barry Harris was a pianist who replaced Richie Powell once Brownie was killed. He toured around with Max Roach. So you see, this guy is on the scene with the most important jazz musicians ever. And he's playing all over the world, but that's not what it's about. It's about his teaching. Now, as he meets Monk, he starts studying Monk's music. And he also meets Monk's friend, who became his friend, the Baroness Nika, and they became friends. And that friendship lasted past death. Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about that. As he continued to do things, he meets up with my man Larry Ridley on bass, a very highly educated musician, Indiana University and things like that, and a accomplished bass player, great recording artist and whatnot. They put together the Jazz Cultural Center or Jazz Cultural Theater. Let's just face it, folks, it was a fancy club. Not so fancy, but very, very high-minded. And only the very, very best musician will come there to play, because they had a strict policy. If you can't play, we're going to tell you straight to your face you can't play. And you're going to be embarrassed. So don't come in here half-stepping. But Barry and Larry and their associates start offering classes for young up-and-coming musicians who had the heart and the dedication to come in there and learn the truth and do the hard work that was always a part of what Barry was doing. And the great Baroness, she fronted the money to put this storefront up on 8th between 27th and 28th, right there in Manhattan. This thing went on for years and years and years, and musician after musician after musician after musician after musician after legend after legend after legend came through there, and they were educated by Barry. One of my students, Mr. Baines, Kendrick, great tenor saxophone player. When he was in New York, he had many opportunities to go visit with Barry Harris and learn from him. Jeff Rupert, who was educated in New Jersey, where Larry Ridley taught, also has a direct connection to Barry Harris, and he sings his praises. As a matter of fact, the first person I heard mention Barry Harris was Jeff Rupert. So you see, Barry never had a degree and he never taught at university. He was always like a guest person. But there are hardly any jazz programs in this country that are not headed by a person like a Jeff Rupert, who was touched and nurtured and challenged and guided by Barry Harris. And he continued to play. One of the most outstanding albums I've been listening to for days now is a live album recorded over 2 days in Japan. Why wasn't recorded here in America? Recorded in Japan. It's called Barry Harris Live at the DUB. 2 Japanese musicians who are swinging, believe it or not. They're not always on top of it, but they're doing their job. And Barry is laying out exactly what jazz should be. And you can hear the swing. You can hear the humor of Monk. You can hear the downward scales of Monk. You can hear the arpeggiations of his mother's church influence. You can hear all the harmonic substitutions and passing chords and all the stuff that he brought to the table that has moved this music forward. Thank God for Barry Harris. He received every award. Starting in 1989, National Endowment of the Arts gave him a Jazz Masters Award. And he's received scores of awards since. Even an honorary doctorate from Northwestern University. So he was recognized by those people who are serious about jazz on the ground. But he's not a household name, which is why I'm talking about him. Barry Harris, Barry Harris, Barry Harris. Go check out his works. He also participated in his later years in videos and workbooks where he outlined his techniques and theories for those who are strong enough to approach it. Go check out his works, his videos, his workbooks, his theory, and get deep in the shed, as Marcus Roberts would say. Get deep in the shed. Go do some serious work if you're going to have the integrity to play this music, because this man stayed true to the essence of jazz: creativity, inventiveness, being an explorer, and always swinging. Now, Barry departed this plane of existence just recently, December 8th. It was 7 days before his 92nd birthday. I actually visited his home, which was the home previously owned by the Baroness. She died in '88, but she left in her will that Barry could stay there until his death. I don't think she realized how long that would be. He just left us. But you know what? On November 20th, he was still teaching via Zoom at 91 years of age. He never stopped. He never got tired. He played his butt off. He taught. He preached. He loved this music. And there is not a jazz artist who has not benefited greatly from his tutelage, his instruction, his influence, his example. Everybody came to the jazz workshops he had, including the biographer for Thelonious Monk and the biographer for Bud Powell. And most days you could find a big silver Bentley sedan parked right in front of the joint. And when you saw that car, you knew that the Baroness herself was there, not just supporting the cause financially, but supporting with her presence and her spirit. Barry Harris, born 1928 in Detroit, learned this music in the School of Hard Knocks and continued to teach and inspire his entire life, almost 92 years. He carried the torch. He was the torchbearer for jazz and jazz improvisation. Go check him out. His recordings, his books, his videos, YouTube, and you will be amazed at how this giant walked among us and you missed him. Thank you.